Hello and thank you for taking the time to watch our webinar. My name is Brendan Crew with Aberdeen, and it is my pleasure to bring to you this on-demand webinar session, Your Email Security is Ineffective and Getting Worse. This webinar was produced by Aberdeen and is brought to you by IRONSCALES. Joining us today is Derek Brink, Vice President and Research Fellow at Aberdeen, and Ian Baxter, Director of Engineering at IRONSCALES. And now to kick things off, I'll hand things over to Derek Brink.
Okay, thank you, and hi everyone. It's Derek Brink here from Aberdeen, based in Greater Boston, and this first slide is just a classic executive summary where I kind of tell you what you're going to hear from me. We start really, as in the title, current email security is really ineffective against both the prevalence and the business impact of phishing attacks. Prevalence and impact, I just want to emphasize, are the two sides of the coin for any proper discussion about risk. So, if it's not prevalent, we don't necessarily care, and if it's very prevalent but it doesn't have any impact, we don't necessarily care either. But that's not the case for phishing. So we'll talk about that, both the ineffectiveness of current measures and also some indicators of how it's getting worse. And then that naturally leads to the question of, so what do we do about that? And so we'll talk about how to adapt and evolve against the attackers. They're financially motivated, they're technically sophisticated, so we need to evolve as well. And that'll be a very natural segue into the part of the presentation from Ian at IRONSCALES. So that's me. I'll just kind of roll right ahead into the first part, which is showing you some evidence that the current email security is ineffective. Now, to do that, there's a quick little simple framework that I've put together here. There's moving from left to right. You can see threats, moving to the right to, there's phishing email attacks. That's what we're talking about primarily. Email security kind of spans the green circle there, which is, we either detect things or we don't. Again, very simple. And if we don't detect them, then there's user behaviors that might come into play as well. So they either click on things that aren't detected or they do click on things. And then if they do happen to click, if it gets through that gauntlet, then we have business impact, which includes things like malware infections and compromised accounts, account takeover, and potentially data breaches. So effective email security involves a blend of things. It's advanced technologies, there's human intelligence, and there's also user behaviors in there. And the current mix of these capabilities, this is the thesis here, is increasingly ineffective. So to give you a little more detail on that, if you look at the next slide, you can see some I guess statistics or evidence of these points. On the threat side, the attackers, as I mentioned already, are financially motivated. They're technically sophisticated. We know from places like, for example, the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report that a very high percentage of organizations experience phishing attacks. The stat I have here is 83% of organizations have experienced phishing attacks in the last year. With respect to detected or not detected, we know that almost all, 94% of attacks continue to use email as the most common attack vector. Just more than 95% of confirmed breaches involve phishing or pretexting. Phishing, of course, as you all know, relies on getting users to click on some kind of malicious attachment or link. Pretexting, if it's not a term you're familiar with, just means you're trying to convince users to voluntarily give up information or take some kind of action. For example, that maybe you're responding to an urgent request of an impersonated executive at your company or a business partner or something like that. And again, email is the predominant vector, although we do see through all the public sources and through research, there's increasing use of social media and other forms. With respect to click rates, we know from, again, publicly available empirical data that click rates on phishing email attacks range anywhere between 6% and 16%. Those are numbers that marketing people would kill for to get that kind of click rates. The attackers have figured that out even better than marketers, apparently. But depending on the industry, it does vary. And then with respect to business impact, about half of successful phishing attacks result in some kind of malware infection that needs to be remediated. So that's time and money. About 2/3 of successful phishing attacks result in some kind of compromise to the account, which can then lead to other bad outcomes. And about 1/4 of successful phishing attacks result in a data breach. So that, again, just using that simple framework, it helps us to have this discussion about what to do. So when we want to talk about why it matters, I think it's critical to talk about why any of this matters. if you want to communicate effectively about the risk of phishing email attacks, you got to use the right language about it. I alluded to this before. That involves not just the technical details about the who and the what and the how, how do bad guys do things and how they exploit vulnerabilities and so on. That's obviously important. But the senior leadership team is mostly interested in the business-oriented details of why this matters. And so we need to talk about both how likely and how much impact, if we're going to talk to the senior leadership team to make an investment, let's say, in more effective controls. And so that would be the proper way to talk about risk. So with that in mind, let me just give you the results of a little simple analysis that I've done to talk about risk in the proper way. This is just using publicly available data. It's a quantitative analysis, and it shows risk not as a single number. That's actually not that useful for the senior leaders. If you just have a single number like, I don't know, there's a common number we've all heard, like the average cost of a data breach is $201 per record. That's just not really that useful to a decision maker. So risk is not expressed as a falsely precise single point estimate. Risk is actually a range of possible outcomes and their associated likelihoods. So again, I'm really pushing hard on this proper definition of risk as a combination of how likely and how much impact. So this what you see on the screen here is it's referred to as an exceedance curve. I know it sounds like a fancy term, and maybe you have or haven't heard of it, but it's really common, and you should know about it. So I'll take a second to explain it to you. The idea behind an exceedance curve is it's what % likely is it to exceed a certain value. So if you read the curve in this way, the y-axis is the percentage. So it's 100% likely to exceed, as you can see there, more than $1. So basically, there's 100% likelihood that it's going to cost something. And the median, that's the 50-50 mark, which is a much more useful number than the average. Median and the average aren't the same thing. So median is 50-50 mark. So this says it's around $8 million. That's the median impact. Half the time it'll be bigger than that, half the time lower than that. And this is on an annualized basis. And then maybe most importantly, there's a 10% likelihood, if you go all the way to the right, there's a 10% likelihood that the total annual business impact from phishing email attacks is more than tens of millions of dollars. I think it says 37 million here in this analysis. So this is referred to often as the long tail of risk. It's just so important for IT and security professionals, if you're trying to communicate effectively to senior leaders, to help them understand the long tail. This is probably where decisions are going to be made. In fact, is not at the low end. If you just say, hey, it's a 90% chance to cost more than a little bit, they'll say thank you and you're done. Maybe even $8 million is not enough to get their attention. Maybe they've got other projects and priorities and so on. But when you start to say, look, there's a 10% likelihood that it could exceed more than $37 million, now maybe you have their attention and they want to know, well, what can we do to mitigate that? So this is what it means to make a decision about risk. You have to decide what is it to do about it. Do I accept it or try to take steps to address it to a level that is acceptable? Now, just to continue on this analysis, this is the same data that you just saw. It's just presented in maybe a simpler way. It's really got the three endpoints of that curve, except you're looking at it kind of straight on. So the one we just showed you is the private sector, kind of all industries. You can see 8 million is in kind of the reddish color there. That's the median, and 37 million at the high end is the long tail. But it does vary by industry, right? Because the click rates vary by industry. The impact of a data breach varies by industry, and so on. So given the differences by industry, I just wanted to show you, if you're in healthcare, for example, the median is 26 million, and the long tail is 112 million, so pretty substantial. In finance, it's a $9 million median, and over 50 million at the long tail. And in education, it's 10 million at the median, and something like 46 million at the long tail. So again, the question is, are these within your organization's appetite for risk? If the senior leadership team says, yeah, thank you for that analysis, and I understand, and I want you to tell me how I can do something about that, then now you have a basis for a business conversation as well as a technical conversation. If they say, no, this is acceptable, then you've made them aware. That's our job, right? We need to make sure they're aware of the risk, and if they decide that they'll accept it, then that's their decision, because they own the risk. It's our job to just make them aware and then do something about it if that's what they decide. So, yeah, with that in mind, that's why email security matters. To the extent that they find this to be unacceptably high, I think I would if I were in charge, but I'm not. But this kind of quantitative analysis explains very straightforward business terms why we need to be motivated to rethink the way we're doing things now. The way we're doing things now, which leads to those kind of numbers I just showed you, are ineffective. And even more importantly, I feel it helps us to justify an incremental investment in a more effective solution. There's so many times, I don't know about you all listening, but we try to make the case for let's say a more effective email security, and it's easy for us to describe that in terms of the technology. This is why it's better from a technical point of view. But when someone says, "Could you explain the business value of that?" We do a lot of crazy things. We show headlines. We're kind of deer in the headlight. We use averages and red, yellow, green sort of things, and none of that really talks properly about risk. So this is just I'm trying to show you a correct and proper way to frame it in business terms in a way that is true to the proper meaning of the term risk. So it's ineffective, and it's getting worse. And this is really fun for me, this next part, because I was able to leverage some empirical data that was provided by IRONSCALES. So let me try to describe this properly to you here. For every uniquely identified phishing email attack, what the IRONSCALES data showed was that this attack affects not just one organization. The attackers are smart. They want to get leverage out of their work. So it attacks a number of different organizations. This is the same idea of an exceedance curve, and it's just showing you that it's somewhere between 5 and more than 150 organizations. That's the range of possible organizations that are affected by a uniquely identified phishing email attack. Not only that, this is not on this chart, but I'll work this into the next slide. It's not only that, but the number of unique user mailboxes affected is also not just a single mailbox. It's somewhere between 2 and more than 40. And this is based on the empirical data that was shared with me by IRONSCALES. So the basic idea here to get across to you is that, looking at that little fulcrum down there in the bottom right, is that one attack can actually require hundreds of detections. So the attackers have the leverage here. This is an asymmetric world we live in, and the attackers have the advantage. They can have a single attack, and it can literally lead to hundreds of detections that have to be made successfully in order to beat them. But it gets worse than that. This is also data from IRONSCALES, which I just found fascinating. It was kind of cool to be able to do this work. To be effective, we've got to address these asymmetries that we were just talking about, but it's worse than that. So the IRONSCALES data shows that more than 40% of phishing email attacks now are it's called polymorphic, which means that they undergo at least one permutation that's designed to evade the traditional defenses and traditional email security controls. So the most sophisticated attackers are already implementing these kind of polymorphic attacks that go hundreds of changes to evade these defenses. And so all I've done here is again a simple quantitative analysis. It's using these ranges of numbers. The greenish line there is a traditional single signature attack, and the curve that you're looking at is it's an exceedance curve, and so the concept you should be used to now. But the calculation is how many mailboxes are affected times how many organizations are affected times how many permutations does it go through. So the green line is kind of the current, traditional single signature attack. And you can see it's anywhere between 20 and 840 detections that you have to have. But with polymorphism being introduced, you can see the orange line, and that's anywhere between 50 and almost 90,000. So the difference here, and at the median, is the difference between 180 and almost 900. So at the low end of that curve, it's anywhere between 2.5 times more. At the median, it's about 5 times more, and at the long tail end of these curves, it's more than 100 times different. And this is the real problem. Think of it sort of as a blast radius, I guess is the term. So the emerging polymorphic phishing email attacks, they're just significantly increasing this blast radius and making the job of the defenders that much harder. And so that's I guess that's one of the biggest pieces of evidence about why it's getting worse. And again, kudos to IRONSCALES for sharing that data with me so I could do a little analysis and share it back with you. I had done some analysis a little bit ago, also using IRONSCALES data about time, and so it's worth spending a minute, no pun intended, talking about why time matters. Why do we have the need for speed here? And so this is actually based on simulated phishing campaigns, or more than 1,400, and the red line here is the time to first click, right? So there's simulated phishing campaigns. IRONSCALES recorded how long did it take for the first users to click on the phishing attack. And you can see, again, with the idea now in your mind about the exceedance curve, the likelihood of a first click within 30 seconds is about 8%. The likelihood of a first click within just 1 minute, 60 seconds, is about 30%. The median, that's the 50-50 mark, is 134 seconds, so a little over, 2 minutes and 14 seconds. And the long tail to the first click is a little more than 4 hours. We're just so conditioned, as users, so we get an email, we respond to it. So that's the red line. The gray line is kind of the other side of the curve, like the last time to click. And so basically the red line sets the bar for performance here. So if you're to the right of the red line on this chart, it's too late, and the first click has already been made. So this is the problem that we have. And the traditional manual ad hoc methods, which is what I'm showing you here, they're just not up to snuff to deal with that. If you use a manual ad hoc approach by a non-dedicated IT staff, like a smaller company would have, the median total time to identify and verify and remediate is more than 3 hours. That's the orange line that's on this chart. And so just to give you the assumptions underlying this little quantitative model here, the time to identify is from immediately to as long as 1 business day. The time to verify is anywhere from 5 to 50 minutes, and the time to remediate is anywhere from 5 to 60 minutes. So, there's empirical estimates for all of those. But you can see just visually, look at the orange line. What part of that space between the red and the gray does it cut off? Well, not very much. It's over at the far right. The reduction in risk from those traditional, manual ad hoc approaches is less than 5%, which means that the residual risk, everything to the left of that orange line, is still there. The manual approaches just don't cut it. And so that's the point of that slide. And this is this next chart. I just was able to use again some empirical data from IRONSCALES to show you. At the time, it's probably better by now, but at the time, the pre-delivery protection was about 25%. In other words, 25% of malicious emails were automatically identified and verified and remediated before they ever hit the inboxes at all. So that purple line starts at about 75%, you can see, over time. And then even after delivery, there's post-delivery protection and incident response. So the median time to identify and verify and remediate is less than 30 minutes. And the real-time checks at the individual inbox are happening too. So there's those real-time checks, there's expert review, and there's automated removal. And that also just contributes to eliminating these things before users have a chance to click. So just based on the empirical data, again, available at this time, which is a little while ago, it's probably better now. The residual risk is much smaller. It's more than a 70% reduction in risk. So by the average time to click on malicious emails, which is about 200 minutes, about 80% have already been successfully identified, verified, and remediated by a combination of pre-incident protection and post-incident protection and remediation. So that's pretty cool analysis too. And again, kudos to IRONSCALES for sharing the data that I used to do that analysis. So I guess we've covered, it's ineffective, your current email. It's getting worse because of polymorphism and speed and all those things. Now we kind of move into the part of setting up the conversation about what can we do about it. And so with that in mind, I go back to that same simple model for discussion that we had. I guess there's really 2 biggest opportunities. This is, not me trying to be an architect, because I'm not. I'm just a humble analyst here. But you can just logically think about it, and there's really 2 opportunities here. And I think you'll hear more from Ian about both of these. The first one is really related to increasing the rate of detection and prevention. How do you do that? There's 3 bullets that I have here. One is that it's the use of advanced technologies for the good guys. The use of automation and artificial intelligence and machine learning. Those are examples of the advanced technologies that will help increase the rate of detection and prevention before the clicks happen. Combine that, though, it's not just technology, but it's a combination of technology along with leveraging human intelligence. So when you've got specialized solution providers and their expertise, such as IRONSCALES, you've also want to incorporate the users as part of the solution so they can report. They're trained to report things more quickly, then that's helpful. And if we have cross-enterprise information sharing, it's no company's an island. We have to share and federate this kind of information across enterprises. That's helpful too. And if we can, of course, we want to have better user behaviors, so we still can invest in security awareness training and other things to help users, help us all not to be dummies and click on the fish. So that's the first part. We increase the rate of detection, and the second part is about time. So I went through that, I think, quick but really neat analysis about the impact of time. And so accelerate the time to detect and to prevent and to remediate. That would be the other big opportunity here for more effective email security. Now, just a couple more slides and I'll turn it over. So it does really require a multi-pronged approach. I kind of drew these 3 circles here that overlap. So we've got the advanced technologies and combination with the human intelligence. The overlap there is community. We've got human intelligence and user behaviors. So in that sense, we've got technical staff, both at the company and at the solution provider. And advanced technologies and user behaviors, I guess we have the vendor analyst coming into play there. So with native email security providers, we do have native capabilities that do have signatures. So one example of that is not the only one, but a common one we might all know is Office 365. So vendor-provided signatures, but they're just much too slow to provide an effective defense. So there's just a representative sample of signatures from Microsoft Advanced Threat Protection. And it took, in this sample, it took between 6 days to more than 250 days from the time a phishing attack was first reported to the time that a signature was made available to the enterprise technical staff. 6 days to 250 days. That's just, you saw the curves before. We even had, hours was too slow. So 250 days is obviously much too slow. So that's not good. And in addition, the trend towards, these polymorphic attacks that we talked briefly about just makes that traditional signature-based approach just marginally useful. So that's the asterisk under signatures there. Right under that, there's the word standards, and so there's an asterisk there as well. What do I mean by that? Here's an example. A DMARC would be the domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance. That's DMARC. That can be really effective against phishing email attacks based on domain name spoofing, provided that both the sender and the receiver are, DMARC compliant. So, for example, this again, some data I was pleased to be able to analyze from IRONSCALES. More than 100,000 email phishing attacks that successfully evaded the native security of email gateways. Less than 1% were based on exact domain name spoofing, which is what DMARC does. So, unfortunately, DMARC works well, but the exact domain name spoofing represents just one of the many easily implemented weapons that the bad guys have in their arsenal, and so you can't rely on that capability either. So under solution providers, we've got specialists who have the automation, the AI, the ML. They've got the real-time capabilities. So we talked about time. Some specialists also offer user awareness training and reporting, tools to help encourage reporting, that kind of thing. So that's why there's kind of a dotted line there. Then on the other side, this idea of sharing, the technical data across communities. So, multi-sourced and decentralized and shared, integrated and verified by the specialist providers. There's a little quote there. I think it's from Game of Thrones, but, how Stark would say, when winter comes, the lone wolf dies, the pack survives. So I guess that's what we're talking about here, is that we're all better together. So that's a quick summary here. It really is, onto this last slide here, 3 takeaways here that, first of all, it really doesn't matter. It's a business issue. that the risk can and should be quantified, and I've tried to show you an example of how to do that. This is what helps the senior leaders make a better informed business decision about whether this is an acceptable level of risk, and if not, what to do about it. So I think I've shown, and you could feel free to use it. In any case, you need to be motivated if you're on an IT or security team, that you should be rethinking your current approach to email security because it's just not effective. In addition, it helps to justify an incremental investment in the more effective solution. That's point number one. Point number two is the attackers are evolving and changing and adapting all the time. The vendors have to do it as well. So they are financially motivated. They're technically sophisticated. They're adapting and evolving. We need to do the same thing. This notion of polymorphic attacks, I guess, is today's news, but it'll change. Next year there'll be something else. But it just shows you. I've shown you an example of how it leads between 2.5 to more than 100 times bigger blast radius for just their effort is multiplied by that amount, which is pretty impressive for them, pretty bad for us. So we need to be able to deal with that. And then, therefore, point number three, and this leads right on to Ian. To be effective given the changing conditions, you just need a multi-pronged approach. So you need this purpose-built blend of advanced technologies and human intelligence and user behaviors, and this combination of trying to detect and prevent things before they even hit the inboxes in the first place, but also being able to respond and remediate quickly for those that do. And also this idea of sharing information and leveraging data across enterprises, which is the last point there. So my bottom line takeaway, which is, again, the perfect handoff, I think, for Ian, is that as you're looking at your selection criteria for more effective email security, you should be keeping these points in mind. And Ian, I think I'll just move to your first slide here. I'll leave it there and be happy to answer questions that anybody might have, of course, but I'm going to hand it off to you at this point. Thank you, everybody.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Derek. There's really a ton of useful information there, so thanks for running through that for us. It's much appreciated. So my name is Ian Baxter. I'm the Director of Engineering for IRONSCALES, based here in Atlanta. And so as Derek has told us, the more sophisticated polymorphic attacks that are out there that carry this really high risk level. And so let's address that and talk about IRONSCALES. So why IRONSCALES? Well, because we can help you stop tomorrow's attacks today. And how do we do this? Well, firstly, by offering our entire integrated platform as infrastructure as a service. Also by providing comprehensive email security, right? This concept of the multi-pronged approach. So comprehensive email security against these advanced threats at a much greater speed. You heard the importance of rapid incident response, and then all the while making this true incident response much easier. So why is it hard to manage email security, right? What's the problem making it such a challenge? Well, traditional tools and point solutions are much too slow and much too complicated against the more advanced threats that are becoming more prevalent. So the way it was done before is simply not going to cut it in the future, right? Machines or tools just definitely aren't going to do it alone. And also neither are people alone going to solve this. Pre-mailbox prevention or trying to stop attacks at the gateway level, that's already proven to be ineffective, really at anything even slightly more sophisticated than the well-known, the old signature-based attacks. Right? So you need to flip the switch on for all of these components in the blue line here. These kind of responses shown here in order to effectively secure your email. So here on the screen, we're highlighting the problems security teams and users have so that we can then answer or address those problems. And here you can see, I'll give you a little bit of time, but here you can see a number of quotes. And these are from actual customers or security professionals based on third-party research. So, the idea of too slow, right, too complicated, too labor-intensive, too limited. And some customers are actually having to hire extra people to manage one single component of their email security, right? So we want to. These are all of these things that are really contributing to this the rapid rise in these advanced and sophisticated attacks becoming more of a problem, right? People are just really not being able to respond to these effectively, again, within those constraints that we want to get to, as Derek was talking about earlier. So organizations need more visibility and more control for better email protection. They're simply not getting it with secure email gateways, right? These traditional secure email gateways just can't detect these advanced attacks or the other emerging tools, right? There's a lot of emerging tools out there that are point solutions and perhaps solve for one thing, business email compromise. So perhaps something like Derek was talking about, a domain spoofing, right? If it's an exact domain spoof, sure, there are tools out there that can handle that, or tools and mechanisms, but they're not comprehensive. And also, our inside-out approach is different than anyone else's. So what we've done is we've fused these, and if you take a look at these two separate boxes here, right? There's the human controls that you perhaps know about on the left-hand side. So what we've done is we've fused these human controls on the left with the technical controls that you see on the right, to come up with a set of what we call hybrid controls that combine both of these approaches in an effective, totally integrated platform that provides complete email security against the advanced types of phishing attacks that Derek was talking about earlier. The idea of these polymorphic attacks that go through iterations depending on either which company they're targeting, which user they're targeting. Perhaps the sender address changes, perhaps the subject line changes. Sometimes they contain things like invoice number or something. Well, they change the subject line, change the body text slightly, change the salutation, and so on. So we want to introduce the concept of the power of now, right? This, and I'll cover this in a little more depth here over this slide, but it's basically the idea of a self-learning platform. As we said right in the beginning, the idea of IRONSCALES is really going to help stop tomorrow's phishing attacks today. We spoke a little earlier about the idea of gateway level security controls, and that's obviously a perfect place to stop phishing emails, right? Is before it hits the mailbox. But unfortunately, these are the kind of attacks that we're seeing out there are bypassing these traditional gateway level security controls, and so they're landing in the mailbox. So obviously, the best time to stop them was before they hit the mailbox, but the second best time is right now when they're in the mailbox, right? So IRONSCALES, we're very focused on post-email delivery, right? So the ability to detect and remediate these emails, but once it's landed in the mailbox, given that these emails are there, we're very focused on remediation and detection once they're actually in the mailbox. And how do we do this? Well, this is through this single integrated platform. We're AI-based, so lots of machine learning algorithms there, but it's not simple machine learning. It's also artificial intelligence-powered total integrated platform. So lots of different components all informing each other and working together as one. And really the focus here, with it hybrid AI protections here, the idea of making it extremely easy to use and extremely fast, right? Much faster than the traditional, as Derek said, those ad hoc responses, right? That may take, incident response time from, that might be hours, if not days. And we want to reduce that incident response time to minutes, if not seconds, all right? So how do we wrap all of this together? Well, we spoke earlier about the human-machine hybrid controls, and so what do we mean when we say these hybrid controls, right? So we're still incorporating those technical controls that you would imagine we're using, such as advanced malware scanning, URL protection, and so on. Things like real-time threat detection, mailbox level anomaly detection, and so on. So these are the idea of what machines know, what machines can detect, and so on, and therefore feed automated incident response via these AI engines. But we also want to integrate that human component that we said earlier, right? So, for instance, include the simulation and training pieces, right? How do we, and therefore, how do we take the results of that and inform some of the different components of the solution? So in other words, the idea of as humans progress at different levels of awareness, right? Some folks are more capable of detecting attacks than others. Well, let's use that to our advantage by giving perhaps added weight to somebody who's demonstrated a high level of awareness, where we can feed different results into our automatic incident response based on who's reporting it and what their demonstrated awareness level is, right? So out of all this, right, so with that automated incident response, right, the idea of tying in virtual security analysts, right, and the ability to offload some of those tasks, some of those responses, offload them to our virtual security analyst, which is basically the concept of learning from thousands of human security analysts around the world, watching how they make decisions, and that then informs this virtual security analyst component so that we can offload the incident response to something like that, right? So it's really this self-learning platform, or this closed feedback loop that will take incidents that have been reported by any of these components, right, the human or the technical components. They automatically inform each other, all of these different components in real time, and then that threat intelligence, distributing that in real time in a decentralized fashion across this global community of security analysts, thousands of human security analysts out there in this global community of threat intelligence that's of these analysts worldwide, and that provides them immediate, actionable threat intelligence in real time. And what this all allows us to do is close the gap on these advanced attacks that today are bypassing the traditional gateway level technical controls and landing in the mailbox. So thank you very much for that. I'll hand it off to close the session for us. Thank you very much.
That concludes our webinar session. I want to take a moment to thank Derek and Ian for sharing their research, insights, and recommendations with us, and thank you to IRONSCALES for making this webinar possible. We hope you have found this webinar to be beneficial, and if you'd like to learn more, you can reach out via the contact information or feel free to visit the links provided. Once again, thank you for watching our webinar, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.